I'm Nathan Kiker. Welcome to our podcast, Clearer Than Truth. I'm glad to be joined by my co-host, George Bogdan. In a world where time is limited, we distill complex ideas, making them not just comprehensible, but in Atchison's words, clearer than truth. George and I have a special episode today with Arash Azizi, a former guest of ours, to discuss the events in Iran today. Arash, thank you for joining us today.
It's great to be with you.
So, of course, this morning there was news out of Iran that the president and foreign secretary were killed. Tell us a bit about the individuals who lost their lives this morning, what their roles were. Obviously, we know they're foreign secretary and the president, but their influence in the country, and just give us a broad background on those two, if you would.
Of course, who are the people who died? So there are four officials: the president of Iran, Ebrahim Raisi, the foreign minister, Hossein Amirabdollahian, and two regional officials. But obviously the most important one is Raisi. Now, in Iran, the president is not a typically powerful position. Sometimes it can be a bit powerful, but Raisi actually himself has not really been a powerful president. The supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who is a cleric effectively appointed for life, he holds most power. So in this sense, you can say, oh, the president is dead. Who cares if the presidency doesn't have that much power? It's the supreme leader who has most of the power. And in fact, Raisi is a very different kind of president than previous presidents of the Islamic Republic, because in 2021, which is when he was elected, he was effectively handed the presidency. So the 2021 elections was the first election since 1997 that there wasn't a real competition. Now, there was an election. There were different people who were running. There were, many Iranians voted, although majority of Iranians for the first time boycotted. The majority of Iranians for the first time didn't vote. But about, it's still something like, 40-something% voted. But effectively, the results were preordained because no serious contender against Raisi was allowed to run. So he was handed the presidency. And he was handed the presidency for one reason. It's because he's this sort of utterly, useless, uncharismatic figure. He's a lot of blood on his hands. He worked for years in the judiciary of the Islamic Republic to kill the opponents of the Islamic Republic. He's responsible personally for executions of thousands of Iranians. But he was this sort of, it was not really a political figure. He can barely give a speech. As I said, he's very uncharismatic. And Khamenei was very worried about charismatic types of people who can be serious rivals to him. So he basically wanted to, it's something very common politically, right? You want to put a vegetable basically in a position like the presidency so that they're not a rival to yourself. But despite all of this, Raisi, of course, had, the fact that he was weak meant that many people close to him had been trying to grab the state, basically, use his weakness to grow, and there were a lot of political factions around him. So the most important political consequence of Raisi's death is that those circles and cliques that were close to him will be weakened, and there will be more power passed on to some of his rivals. Most importantly, I think the man who stands to benefit the most is Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf. That's the Speaker of the Parliament, who is a very different kind of figure. He's very technocratic, right? Is not known to be sort of very ideological, and I think his hand will be now strengthened. All of this also matters not just because of how Iran is today. Today, the power firmly lies with Ayatollah Khamenei, the supreme leader. But Khamenei is 85 years old. So everybody is basically trying to get their ducks in order for when that moment of Khamenei's death will come, and there will be a ferocious power struggle over, who's going to come out on top. So who holds what position? It's almost like a musical chairs. Like when that moment comes, who's standing and who's sitting at that moment when the music stops is going to matter a lot. Now Iran has to have elections within 50 days, right? Less than 2 months. And if Ghalibaf is able to capture the presidency, as many people, as close to him seem to want him to do that, it would definitely shape the kind of power struggles that we're going to have, especially when Khamenei dies.
Tell us about the incoming likely president.
So Ghalibaf, I'm not saying that it is likely president, but I think he has probably the highest chance. He's currently the Speaker of the Parliament. So let me just tell you what exactly happens now in terms of procedurally, right? So if Raisi is dead, Mokhber, his vice president, he's kind of a nobody. He'll assume the functions of the presidency, and together with a couple of others, the heads of parliament and the judiciary, that's Ghalibaf and some other guy, Mohseni Ejei. They're going to have to organize elections within 50 days. Now, like every other election in the Islamic Republic, not everybody can run in these elections. In fact, there is a body called the Guardian Council. This is a body of clerics and jurists. That is all of them, 12 of them. All of them are directly or indirectly appointed by Khamenei, the supreme leader. They decide who gets to run and who cannot run. So as a result, we don't know even if maybe Khamenei wouldn't allow Ghalibaf to run, or maybe he will allow some others to run that they can defeat Ghalibaf. So I'm not saying it's by no means is it secure that Ghalibaf will be the next president, but I think it's very likely. And who is Ghalibaf? So he is a guy who has spent much of his life in the IRGC, that is the Islamic Revolution Guards Corps, this militia that founded right after the Iranian Revolution in 1979, and that really today holds much of the military and economic power in Iran. In the 1980s, Iran had a war with Iraq, with a very tough war with Iraq, and Ghalibaf served, Iran in that war, served IRGC in that war. He has a lot of connections from those days. He was later on the head of the sort of IRGC Air Force. Most people my age probably remember him as mayor of Tehran. He was mayor of Tehran for many years. And frankly, I'm no fan of the Islamic Republic, no fan of a figure like Ghalibaf, who is very corrupt. But he wasn't a bad mayor in some ways. Frankly, I mean, he was. If you lived in Iran on that day, you could see the difference, right? That he had some competencies. I guess I think it's because he was technocratic. I know him. I know some people close to him. I don't think he has a bureaucratic. Sorry, I don't think he has a theocratic or like ideological or Islamist bone in his body, if you ask me. I think he's a power-hungry guy. He's very corrupt, by which I mean, he has obviously used his connections to enrich himself and his family. His son was recently rejected permanent residence in Canada, and as part of that, his application leaked. And the application showed that in just a couple of bank accounts in Australia that he had applied, he had hundreds of thousands of dollars. And he only showed 2 bank accounts to Canadians, right? So it's very clearly that this is a corrupt man.
What was his position on the nuclear deal with the U.S. in 2015?
By the time of 2015, he wasn't one of those. So it's a good question, because when the nuclear deal was happening, many hardliners were organizing against the deal in Iran, and they were sort of IRGC and others were leading the charge against the deal. Ghalibaf wasn't really one of them. So I think his foreign policy basically would also be somewhat flexible and open to whatever kind of dealings he makes. I mean, he's known, for example, and others have written about this, he's known to have admired the Israel because of its sort of Israeli military's role in society, and as a former military man himself, sort of appreciates it in this very technocratic way, right? So I think he belongs to a generation of figures in the Islamic Republic who've realized the Islamic Republic has failed, who've realized the ideology has failed, and they'd like to be they'd like to run Iran as this massive country, and they'd like it to, run more efficiently, and because Iran has a huge crisis of competency, and part of the reason for that, why would this helicopter crash, right? This is a Bell 112 helicopter, which was built in the United States in Texas in 1979. I think at some point they moved the production lines to Canada, so maybe this was made in Canada, but I think this was actually made in the U.S. But who gets on a helicopter made in 1979? This is all the results of the policies of the Islamic Republic that has internationally isolated Iran, which means a crisis of competence, which means Iran is not able to do things that other countries do. So people like Ghalibaf are those who'd like to change that, and they, how they will do that. I think that they are likely to. We're talking about a lot of big ifs. If these kind of people are able to come on top after Khamenei, I think they'd like to soften some of the domestic policies, and perhaps even change international policies to make them less belligerent and create more diplomatic ties with Iran and the West.
On that topic, we I think have to presume that this is, of course, an accident in the meantime, right? But I wonder, whether you think it's kind of necessary to ask the kind of odious question of whether there might be intrigue involved. The country, I think, from an American perspective, is so opaque. I'm reminded by what Winston Churchill said about political intrigue in the Kremlin, which is that it's like a bulldog fight under the rug, and that you don't know who's the winner until the bones of the loser fly out. But I mean, it's, do you think that there is some reason to be thinking about what might be happening, in the background for a potential intrigue taking place, or is it too soon?
No, I mean, look, I think there's an easy answer to this question, which is that, when someone on this level, especially in a regime like Iran, dies in a helicopter crash, no one will necessarily accept that, oh, definitely there was no foul play, right? So people are still, debate. I mean, I can name them all, right? Doug Hammarskjöld's plane crashed in northern Rhodesia, Lin Biao in China, Zia-ul-Haq in Pakistan, President Kaczynski of Poland in when was it, 2010, right? So people will forever debate it. So like no matter what, I'm usually not into the conspiratorial stuff, right? So but I mean people will forever think that there might have been foul play. And in Iran, even when people die just out of a basic heart attack, people think it's foul play, let alone when it's a helicopter crash. At the same time, of course, the weather really was bad and the helicopters are not great. But why would they get into this helicopter? And perhaps if you wanted to do something, the fact that it's foggy, gives it the perfect sort of example. So, yeah, so I mean, I think at that point, it's a sort of an empirical question, as historians like to say, right? So, whatever intelligence people gather up might be able to make a conclusive, conclusion in one way or the other. But what is interesting to me is to say who benefits from this. And I think Ghalibaf benefits, as I said, because I think people, in Raisi and people around him were a serious obstacle to Ghalibaf and them. Allies of Raisi, for example, had done really well in the parliamentary elections to the detriment of Ghalibaf and his team earlier this year. Now, is it that, because Ghalibaf lost the parliamentary elections 2 months ago, he would organize the killing of Raisi? I mean, I don't think so. But, as I said, I'm not an intelligence guy, and so I can't say that. But I can say that it will really benefit Ghalibaf and them. And I think that's who's going to benefit politically. I can't see actors outside Iran to have had any role. I mean, initially didn't discount it, right? If you really wanted to do this, you could also work with actors outside Iran, but there's no evidence for any of that. It might very well have just been an accident. As I said. And, I have driven in those roads in northwestern Iran. Those roads are crazy with a car in the middle of the day, and on a good day. But on a day as rainy as today, and with the kind of fog that was there, it's not hard to see why they would have had a crash.
On a kind of similar note, given that the sort of governing doctrine of Iran's state is the kind of Vilayat al-Faqih, which is sort of above the president, above the kind of secular institutions of state. I think, your average person might think, oh my gosh, this is going to spark some kind of constitutional crisis. But given the structure of the state, would you say that it's not necessarily the kind of big crisis that, would be in another country, or am I mistaken in that?
No. I mean, there is no constitutional crisis because the constitution defines very clearly what happens if a president dies, right? I mean, like every constitution usually does that, and the Iranian one does as well. And I mentioned exactly what happens, right? So there is a vice president, there's new elections, and we've been there before, right? The Rajai, an Iranian president, was killed in a terror attack early 1980s, and he was replaced rather swiftly, first temporarily, and then there were elections, and then they picked another guy, and so I know it wouldn't be constitutional crisis, but it definitely will create some political instability. The problem is that the Islamic Republic is a master of political instability. If I was in charge of the Islamic Republic, I'd get worried when things are a bit calm because they have always rode the waves of instability. I mean, Iran is like almost forever unstable politically. There's always something happening. To think about it, Khamenei has had to deal with a few presidents in his reign. He has fallen out with every single one of them, right? There's not one president that Khamenei worked with and he didn't have some sort of a break with. So Iranian politics, the politics of the Islamic Republic have been always very volatile, and surely the death of Raisi and the potential of the presidency passing down to Ghalibaf will matter politically, especially, as I said, will also matter for this musical chair moment when Khamenei dies, when it really matters who controls what. For example, the other thing is Raisi could have become a Raisi was a deputy head of the Assembly of Experts, which is a body tasked with picking the successor to Khamenei. He could have. There's a new Assembly of Experts that was just elected earlier this year, so it's gonna meet soon to pick its new presidium, which presumably will have some role in deciding who the next supreme leader is if Khamenei dies within the next 6 years, which I think is very likely. Raisi is out of there too. So, now the Assembly of Experts is filled with pro-regime hardliners, so, it won't be a huge change. But it does matter that this figure who had, after all, was this experienced bureaucrat and had built this thing around himself. Raisi is also important regionally because he's from the holy city of Mashhad in northeastern Iran. It's Iran's second biggest city. There's very important links there. His father-in-law is a very powerful cleric there who is the Friday prayer leader there. Funnily enough, his wife is probably the most notable first lady in Iran for a while. I mean, she tried to do things publicly and build a profile around herself, which also means because she comes from a dynasty, right? Her father, as I said, is a Friday prayer leader. So taking Raisi out of the equation of political power, I think, will have some consequence. So I don't agree with those colleagues of mine who've said basically this is politically insignificant for the Islamic Republic. I think it's politically significant.
So you think it was likely just an accident, and I don't like to speculate, but if it turned out that a foreign actor was involved, how do you think Iran would respond?
So Iran would only have to respond if it was clear that a foreign actor did something. Let's say United States or Israel, right? But even if there was some covert operation that we never learn of and things like that, I mean, it wouldn't be it wouldn't be open, so Iran wouldn't have to do anything. I would say that many pro-regime accounts have actually been going out of their way to say, don't say it's Israel. That only strengthens, this puts Israelis in such a powerful light, So I think they'll go out of their way to be very clear that no, we don't think it's Israel. We're not blaming Israel. We don't want to use this to have some sort of a conflict with Israel.
So you recently, it's a slightly change of tune here or a shift, but you recently wrote a book about the women in Iran. Talk to us about how the new leadership is on the issue of advancing women's rights.
Look, the subjugation of women. My friend Karim Sajjad wrote a beautiful article recently in the New York Times in which he says that subjugation of women and enmity against West and enmity against Israel are like the three pillars of the Islamic Republic. And I think he's got it exactly right. I think for revolutionaries like Khamenei, the Islamic Republic exists because it's able to. And why subjugation of women is so important to them? Of course, they don't see it as a subjugation, right? What they see it, like all revolutionaries, they see it as reordering society, right? So they believe that the proper Muslim woman has to cover her hair and play certain roles and, not be what they would consider Western, right? Wouldn't listen to music, wouldn't sing, wouldn't work a lot of jobs, it would be primarily a mother at home, and right. So it's this socially conservative vision, with a particular sort of Islamist repressive tinge to it. That's what they want. Now, the problem is that they've met the Iranian women who are, nothing like that. I mean, I think there are countries in the world in which if you wanted to enforce this vision, you had perhaps an easier time, at least in the short term. But Iranian women have a long history of a struggle. Iranian organized feminist movement goes back to more than 100 years ago. Already in the time of 1905, 1906 revolution, we had organized feminist groups. By the time 1979 revolution happened in Iran, we had female judges, female cabinet ministers, female ambassadors. So it's very hard to socially subjugate Iranian women. And that's why they've been on the forefront of a lot of struggles in the last 40 something years. And they really have been. I'm not saying it because I like this as sort of a point. It's just a fact. They've been there. So if in the post-Khamenei Iran, if let's say these technocrats, centrists, whatever you want to call them, these people who would like Iran to change direction come to power, I think they'll pragmatically learn that they're going to have to sort of ease the repression a little bit, right? Probably get rid of the compulsory hijab, this rule that has all the Iranian women are forced to cover their hairs. Either first don't enforce it and then sort of get rid of it. So I think if they want to make a few compromises, that means they will have a bit of a honeymoon with the people and have less headache, right? because it's a tough thing to run a government when you constantly have to repress everyone. No government actually likes to do that, right? Khamenei does it because he cares a lot about the vision of the Islamic Republic. He's a genuine revolutionary, right? He doesn't want to just stay in power. He wants to stay in power and for the Islamic Republic to remain true to the vision that he has. So I think if this pragmatic technocrat types come to power, we'll see a ease on women's oppression for pragmatic purposes.
Similarly, we've talked about what might occur internally in Iran. Do you think that if there is a shift in who holds power, we could see a decision by the Iranian government to engage in less intrigue abroad, less kind of fomenting of difficulties for other countries? How do you think that might play out?
This is a good question. I wrote an article in the New York Times a while back, but in which I sort of predict the future of Iran post Khamenei, and I said the stuff that I just told you domestically, and I said similar stuff internationally. That I think yes, it would mean that they will lessen the troublemaking. They will try to make some sort of modus vivendi with the United States and Israel. So that's what I think. Although I've gotten the pushbacks on that, and I'm sort of talking to people. So what I think will happen is that whoever it becomes in charge of this post Khamenei Iran, you can't give up all the militias and all the sort of work that the Islamic Republic has done. Probably from just pure statehood perspective, you can't just give them up. You got to use them. Basically, have a return on your investment at the very least, right? But what I think is that they'll probably, as we kind of saw this during the Rouhani administration, a very much a technocratic sort of centrist administration, I think we're going to see a basically less adventurism abroad, less attempt to foment instability in the countries of the region, and ultimately probably an end to this attempt to destroy Israel and to attack Israel and to arm militias against Israel, just because it's not in the interest of Iran, basically. And if you want to be a, good old military or authoritarian government where you are corrupt and, you run things in the country and you have power, it doesn't make sense for you to pick fights with Israel all the time and pick fights with the United States all the time. So I think they'll find a way to come to an agreement with the United States. And that, they don't even need to do anything about Israel. They can come to an agreement with the United States, which would already sort of include some sort of a modus vivendi with Israel. For long, Khamenei's line has been no war, no negotiations. That's his line about the US, which is kind of untenable. But anyways, I think that's what they pursue. The other thing you have to remember, this is a very important and perhaps a little underreported issue, is that Iran is in the process of changing its nuclear doctrine, to use sort of a think tanky language. But basically, it used to be the Islamic Republic said, we hate nukes, we can never have nukes, nukes are un-Islamic, we would never. And now, repeatedly, very senior officials of the Islamic Republic, including those close to Khamenei, say, well, we might just have to have nukes. Now, I don't think they've made that decision to go to do that. But Iran is currently pretty much the only country in the world which is in this situation, that has this much enriched uranium, and has not yet built a bomb. I know there's some disagreements as to how long it is away from having a bomb, and what does that really mean. And if it has a bomb, then how long is it away from having missiles that could carry the bomb? And but it's just the fact that repeatedly now several officials of the Islamic Republic have gone on the record saying we might just have to have nukes. This is a very important change that has happened really in the last few months. It used to be that every couple of years someone would drop a hint, but now just in the last few months there's almost a campaign of Iranian officials saying this. Now, perhaps this has something to do with the secret talks of Iran and the United States. There are some secret talks that have been going on the last few months in Oman. Perhaps it's about how well they're going or not going. But yes, at any rate, it's an important factor in the situation.
I want to just quickly ask, I'm struck that in moments of kind of earthquake in Iranian politics, just for example, the 79 revolution, I mean, it's not necessarily the most popular faction that kind of gets power. So, I mean, I don't think that those at the forefront of the Islamic Revolution were, the most popular in Iranian politics, but they were the most cunning, right? And so I wonder, I certainly hope that, some of these, changes might come about in Iran's foreign policy. But do you think, just to entertain the kind of possibility, are there hardliners sort of waiting in the wings that are opposed to the vision of the so-called technocrats that might, seize power and kind of continue or even escalate, some of the more kind of confrontational foreign policy that we've seen over the last decade?
This is a good question. They exist, right? These hardliners. Some of them might also be hardliners and want this policy from a nationalist point of view, not even an Islamist revolutionary point of view. But they might their vision of a strong Iran might include confrontation with Israel, right? They exist, but the key thing is the devout Islamist revolutionaries like Khamenei, who wanted to continue that revolution in that tradition, they're a spent political force. I mean, I don't think they have a future in post-Khamenei Iran. So I used to say, Iran has three futures, if you will. South Korea being democratic, North Korea as in even a more extreme version of what it is there, and Algeria or Pakistan, i.e. a military dictatorship where there's no grand ideology, and in the multipolar world that we're having, this type of countries like Pakistan and Algeria are very common, right? It's a country whose main purpose is to follow some sort of a national interest. Now, I think in the future of Iran, this Pakistani model is much more likely than either North or South Korea in the immediate future. I think there are people like me who will fight for South Korea, for liberal democracy, and I think this fight will continue. I don't think we are in a place where we can win very easily. I hope that I'm surprised. But I also don't think the North Korea faction has much of a say, just because it just doesn't work. What do I mean when I say it doesn't work? It has very little popularity in Iran, so it makes it very hard to to keep yourself in power, and also you have to fight all the time. I mean, just in the past 4 months, 6 months, Iran has attacked 2 nuclear powers. I don't know when was the last time this happened in world history. A country has attacked the territory of 2 nuclear powers, right? Israel and Pakistan. It's a very unstable situation. And the kind of international isolation, Iranians can't do anything. They can't buy anything. They can't take part in any trade. So it's just a very unfortunate situation to be. So naturally, whoever is in power would like to change that.
Thanks again for joining us for this episode of Clearer Than Truth. See you next time.